Today's scripture is a familiar one from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 to 10. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So I am very much on record that Easter is my holiday of choice. Christmas is great and all, but I really do love Easter and the season of it and everything. But it does present a problem to pastors because what can you possibly say about Easter that many of you have not heard 100 times before? And for those of you who I really only ever see on this day, then all you ever hear about is Easter. And you know, I'm sure I sound like I repeat myself a lot. But so instead of talking about Easter, which is my favorite thing, we're talking about my next favorite thing, which of course is Star Wars. And I warned you last week that we were going to talk a little bit more about Star Wars today. Not as much, but a little bit. We're going to start there. And we're talking specifically about the third movie to be released, which was called, of course, Return of the Jedi. Now, as you know, there are people who like to pontificate about everything, especially anything pop culture online. Don't look it up. It's not worth your time. And if you want any of your favorite things ruined for you, just go online and read the comment section on anything about it, and they will tell you why everything is just stupid. And there are some probably legit criticisms of the third movie. So if you remember, and if you haven't seen it, just, balance your checkbook for the next 5 minutes, and we'll move on to something else. But there's a movie in between the first movie and the third movie, the second movie, right? And the second movie is the quintessential middle chapter in that it doesn't end well, right? By the end of the second movie, the rebellion and the heroes are not in good shape. One of them's been disfigured. One of them's been captured. Their base has been destroyed. Things are not looking good for the rebellion at the end of the second movie. And so we get to the third movie, and we start to see the consequences of that. Now, there's a couple of things about the third movie that's always bugged me. One is the Ewoks are clearly a ploy to sell toys, but they're darn cute, so we forgive. But the other thing that always bugged me about it for a long time was the idea in the third movie is the idea of the second Death Star. So the first movie is all about blowing up the first Death Star, if you remember. Again, bad branding. Don't call your thing the Death Star. Call it the Happy Time Space Station. People won't be as worried about it. But so in the third movie, they come back like, oh, we have another one. It's just like, well, that kind of just always felt like lazy writing to me. Like, really, George Lucas, you couldn't think of something better than another Death Star? But recently, as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, actually, this is rather apt. And what I mean by that is because at the end of the second movie and the rebellion looks like it's on its way out and it looks like everything is heading back in favor of the Empire, it is not really a surprise that the leadership of the Empire do their best to return back to the way things were or how they feel that they ought to be. The idea that they're going to go back and try again the thing that they tried before, thinking now we've taken care of that little problem of all these upstart people, actually makes some sense, because this is what we do. Right? I mean, most of us don't actually like it when life changes, and especially when life changes unexpectedly. And the Empire having their first giant space station blow up was obviously unexpected. So they are attempting to go back to the way things were and saying, that Death Star was a really good idea. Maybe we should try that again. And everybody looked around, I'm sure, at whatever meeting they had where they decide these things in evil empires. I'm sure it's a very fun meeting. Lots of good pastries. Anyway. They said, sure, why don't we do that? Because, things definitely looked better back then, and wouldn't it be great to have this thing? Empires, those who are in charge and trying to stay in charge, don't like change. And I think we see that in this movie. So it's not a surprise to me that they actually do try to do the thing over again. We actually see the same thing in the empire that Jesus is dealing with in his day. Because in Jesus' day, God's people in Israel are living under an empire, the Roman Empire. They're very much in charge and very much want to stay in charge. They don't like it when people try to do anything other but let them be in charge. And one of the expectations that folks had of Jesus is Jesus, as the Messiah, was going to come and do certain things. And one of the things that they would hope he would do was kick the Romans out. So when Jesus doesn't do that, he doesn't kick the Romans out, and in fact does something very unexpected himself in that he dies, which is not something you expect in a Messiah, people are obviously a little concerned. And those who are in charge, both the people from Rome and the religious leaders of the day who conspired to get rid of Jesus in the first place, are probably feeling pretty good about themselves. Now, each of our Gospels adds different details to the story. And one of the details that Matthew adds to the story is of the guards at the tomb. And these guards are imperial guards. So think like stormtroopers, but, first century, if you want. That's how I like to picture them. But they're standing guard because they don't want anything to happen to Jesus' body. They don't want anybody to steal Jesus' body. They're concerned about, who else might come. They're also there to see who might come and try to, honor or offer respects to Jesus so they can figure out who else is part of this conspiracy that they're worried about. So the Roman guards are there, quite simply, to guard. And they are there to make sure that Jesus and his movement and his followers truly are gone, so that the leaders of the day can go back to the way things were. And if we keep reading, if we keep reading in the scripture, you will see that the guards are actually going to go back and report that, well, actually, there's this crazy thing that just happened. And they're going to go back and tell the empire and the religious leaders about what happened. And they, of course, continue to do the thing that they know how to do, which is they basically tell the guards to shut up and not tell anybody. And in fact, they bribe them, they pay them, they bribe them the same way they bribed Judas to rat out Jesus in the first place. They bribe the guards again to basically keep the whole thing hushed up and under wraps, because they don't want anything getting out about what's going on. Why? Because they're afraid that things will change. They're afraid that their power and their privilege might be taken away from them. They cannot see, because they are so afraid of things changing, they cannot see the miracles that are literally happening in front of them at that moment. And the guards can't even see it either, because they take the money and run. Easter is a story about redemption. Easter is a story about God doing something unexpected. Easter is a moment where the world changes fundamentally. Without Easter, none of us are here. There is the world before Jesus and his ministry and before the Easter miracle, and the world after. And the world after is different than the world before. It was a great moment of change in history. It is why we have 2,000 years of Christian history that follow. It's why we're here today. The people at the time could not see at the time how much the world had just changed in front of them. All they could see and do is do everything in their power to keep it from happening. But Spoiler alert, we're here. Obviously, they weren't very successful. This is one of those stories, this is one of the most important truths about Easter, is when we get to this moment and the greatness of it and the idea and the excitement that we have for Jesus and what Jesus did and the idea that Jesus overcomes death and all this wonderful stuff, we are in danger of making an assumption that is not true. And the assumption we can make that it's not true because Easter is so important and so wonderful and so joyful is that maybe the cross really wasn't that bad. The cross was bad. The cross was about as bad as it gets. If you're going to get rid of somebody, that's basically the worst way to do it. Jesus coming out of the tomb makes something amazing and hopeful out of something that is awful and terrible. And that is the power of Christ. God has this annoying habit of messing with our lives and changing things. Sometimes those changes are pleasant. Sometimes they feel decidedly unpleasant. Sometimes it feels like the world conspires to ruin our day, ruin our week, or ruin our year, and things change in a way that we don't like, and that is challenging for us. And those things happen. And they continue to happen. Jesus coming out of the tomb is a reminder that God actually brings us hope in those times when we need it most, when the world feels like it's changing around us. Now, many of you know that before I was a pastor, I was a software engineer, and I did that for a number of years, and I always get the question of, why did you choose to become a pastor? And it's actually, and I think I've shared the story a couple of times with you all, but it was basically because of Hurricane Katrina. I got to go and be a responder to Hurricane Katrina, and through that process discovered that I had passions and interests outside of sitting at a cubicle in front of a computer all day. God bless all of you who do that. And it was out of that story. And I shared that story once early on when I was just a student pastor, and a woman that I knew kind of a little bit from the church that I had been mentored under, she was the music leader there. And she came to talk to me afterwards, and she's like, that's funny because I have the same story, or a very similar story, except she herself was actually in New Orleans. She actually lived in the 9th Ward. Her house was flooded, 10 feet above it. She was displaced. All her neighbors was displaced. Her neighborhood was gone. Several people she knowed had died, and she lived in a shelter for about 3 weeks. She actually was in one of the shelters I was working in while I was there. And so we talked about that story. And she said, yeah, and you couldn't stay there forever, so we eventually had to go somewhere. And literally, she got on a bus because they were just busing people out. And only after they got on the bus did they tell them where they were going. And where they were going was Columbus, Ohio. And everybody said, great. Columbus is fine. I lived there for 4 years. It's okay. And they ended up getting dropped off, at a shelter there, and eventually kind of made their way. And she finally found her way to this church for all people, where they discovered she had these great musical gifts and talents. And within a short amount of time, she became the worship leader for that congregation because they had just lost their person. And she had now been there for 3 or 4 years, and while it was no way, and living in Ohio was never any part of her life plan, she understood that at this point she's pretty much stuck and she's there. And we're talking about this, and while we're talking about it after worship service, one of the members of the church comes up, and they're like, and they kind of overhear the conversation, and they look at her, and they're like, we're just so grateful that you came to us. It's like that hurricane was just like blessing you to blow you up here for us. And I swear to God, she tried really hard to hide her eye roll, but she just didn't quite get it. But I don't think the person actually saw it, but I saw it. And after that person left, and I'm like, what was that? And she's like, I know. And that led us on this whole other conversation, which is again something that we do, right? I mean, yes, her congregation was grateful she was there. He was a blessing to them. They thought she was wonderful. She kind of just showed up out of nowhere and filled a need for them, and all of that was great and wonderful and tremendous. And Hurricane Katrina was still bad. Losing your house to a hurricane is bad. Having all of your belongings, all your memories, all your children's photo albums, washed away is bad. So the idea, that a hurricane, was a blessing was not one she could wrap her head around, nor agree with. Being in Columbus, being at that church, serving where she served, was. Being invited into that community that cared and loved and it was friendly and opened their arms to her and embraced her in the way that they did that was a blessing. That was new life for her. That was hope out of hopelessness for her. It does not mean that the hurricane was good. We will all have events in life that will change things. We will mark time by the time before and the time after. Any of us who have children know that, right? There's the time before you have kids when you can actually, go out to eat and have fun. And then there's a time after kids. Yeah, my daughter just, she perked up. All right. But yeah, in case you wondered if she listens to me, only when I'm talking about her. Anyway, all right, love you. All right. Man. All right. So, but there are life events, a move, an unexpected move, a graduation from school, whatever it is. Some of these things, we understand as blessings. Other times, the life events, not so much. Something unexpected happens, something tragic happens. We lose somebody we didn't expect to lose. We lose a job we didn't expect to lose. A hurricane comes and wipes our house out, hopefully not. But around here, we do have wildfires and floods and all these other things. And we start to mark time by what was before and what was after. And one of the things our passage does and Easter does is it invites us to be honest about the things that are hard. Honest about the fact that sometimes bad things happen. Honest about the fact that many of us and all of us at some point in life has faced trials and struggles. That not everything is not 100% okay all the time. Some of us are feeling rather not okay right now. Some of us, despite this being Easter Sunday, are still facing our struggles and our challenges and our trials and wondering if we are going to find another side of it. Easter Sunday in the empty tomb is the reminder to us that God brings hope in all of those situations. That God can bring hope even when things look dark. God can bring hope when things look hopeless. God can help us overcome things that we don't feel we could ever overcome on our own. Because Easter reminds us that we're not on our own. Jesus came out of the tomb, not for him, but for us, to show us what's possible with God, to show us what God's kingdom looks like. And in God's kingdom, we find hope. In God's grace and love, we find hope. We find it in God's church. We find it with the people that we choose to spend time with. We find it in the community around us, in our family, wherever it is. We are here to remember and to celebrate, yes, something amazing, something miraculous, something that changed the world. And the thing that changed the world was the hope that came when Jesus was raised. He was not raised for himself, but he was raised for us. The empty tomb tells us that healing is possible, that wholeness is possible, that overcoming challenges is possible, even when it feels like they're not. Not because we're so special and we're so amazing, but because God is. And because God is prepared to do anything and everything God can to help us through it, including sending God's own Son to do the worst thing that is possible to do to a person, so we can have the hope of the best thing that is possible to happen. God came in the form of Jesus to show us how to live, to show us how to love each other, to remind us that our goal in life is simple. It's to love God, love neighbor, and love ourselves, and to make sure that we knew when we don't feel like we have the strength to love in the way we should, or we feel like the world is weighing us down more than we can handle, that the empty tomb is there to remind us that we are not alone. We are not carrying the burden alone. Jesus is with us and remains with us. And if Jesus can overcome the cross, Jesus can help us overcome the things in our lives too. That is the story of Easter, and that's why we have to keep coming back to this place. We have to recognize that, yes, sometimes life will change in unexpected ways, sometimes for good and sometimes for not. And it also is true that when those things happen, when the change happens, is where God is most likely to show up with a new hope, a new way of being, a new way of seeing, and with the strength we need at the time. Let us be grateful this Easter for all of that. Amen.